and welcome to the meeting of the Standards Committee on the 10th of September 2021. Before we do move off, can I please remind you all to switch off your phones or put them on silent or put them on airline mode or whatever you've got to do to stop them disrupting the meeting. And in addition, can I refer you to the protocols for remote meetings which you have previously been circulated. That is, your microphone should be switched to mute unless you are speaking. The Democratic Service Officer will take a roll call at the start of the meeting of all the members and officers. Should you wish to speak, to ask a question or to make a comment, could you please indicate either via the chat function or by raising your electronic hand via Teams. I will assume that you have all read the paperwork before us today prior to the meeting. And in case you didn't know, I'm Cliff Jones, Chair of the Standards Committee. Tammy, I'm now going to ask you to take a roll call, please.
Certainly, thank you, Chair. I shall mark you as present. Vice Chair Barbara Richards. We can see you, Barbara. You put yourself on mute. That's fine. Thank you. Councillors Dennis Keogh.
Present, Tammy.
Thank you. And Sharon Freegard.
Present, Tammy.
Thank you. Co-opted members Louise Fleet.
Present, Tammy.
Thank you. And it is just Louise. We're missing Tom Ward and Jerry Reynolds this morning. Officers present are myself, Tammy Davis, Democratic Services Officer, and Craig Griffith.
Indeed, present, Tammy.
Thank you. We also have invited attendees this morning. We've got Catherine Charles, Clerk to Neath Town Council. Good morning. And Wendy Thomas, Clerk to Coed Frank Town Council. Good morning, both. Good morning. Chair, the roll call is complete.
Thank you, Tammy. Okay, we'll go on to item 2 on the, item on the agenda following the roll call, and that's the Chair's announcements. There aren't any announcements for me to make, but can I take this opportunity, as Tammy has just said, to welcome Catherine Charles, Clerk to Neath Town Council, and Wendy Thomas, Clerk to Coed Frank Council, who are going to join us today for agenda item number 5. On to agenda item number 3, members' interests. Are there any interests to declare? Please indicate by raising your electronic hand via the Teams or indicate via the chat function, and when called, state the details. Democratic Services Officer will then forward an electronic version of the Declaration of Interest form for you to complete and email back to the officer.
I see none, Chair.
There aren't any. Okay, thank you, Tammy. So that we can now move on to agenda item 4, and that's the minutes of the previous meeting of the council. And I refer to the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 27th of January 2021. Before I move confirmation of the accuracy, are there any comments on the accuracy of the minutes?
No indications, Chair.
All right then. Okay, we'll accept that they are a true record of our last meeting. So I can now move to confirm of the accuracy of the meetings. Can I have a seconder? If you do not indicate to the contrary, it will be assumed that you are in favour of the recommendation. Can I have a seconder, please?
Yes, I second. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Louise. All right, and now we move on to agenda item number 5, the Town and Community Council Code of Conduct matters. And once again, I'd like to welcome Catherine Charles and Wendy Thomas to today's meeting. I hope it's going to be beneficial to the Standards Committee members to hear directly from clerks on how the Code of Conduct process is applied in town and community councils. And I'll call on Craig to present his report, please.
Thank you very much then, Chair. So thank you, members, obviously, for attending today. As you'll be aware, one of the remit of the Standards Committee is obviously to look at the Code of Conduct matters for not just only county borough councillors, but also our town and community councillors as well. And historically, over the last few years, we've had a few referrals which have obviously been made to you, which you have considered. And we've talked by and large about how we, as the Standards Committee, myself as the council's monitoring officer, kind of look at promoting this Code of Conduct and making sure that all members are ultimately aware of some of those obligations at the same time. All town and community councillors have the code of conduct, and it's a very similar version to what we use within the county borough councillors as well. But one of the things I'm often very conscious about is that although we can assist, we can ultimately provide guidance ultimately to town and community councillors in that regard. We don't have that level of contact with them that I would still have, for example, with our county borough councillors. And so for that end, the people who are very much on the front line of monitoring code of conduct compliance, with support from various other individuals, are our clerks to our town and community councils. So I thought it might be advantageous today to introduce two of the clerks ultimately, and perhaps we can have a general discussion with them about how they have approached particular code of conduct matters, what sort of issues ultimately they come across ultimately in that regard, and perhaps try and find out some ways how the Standards Committee and then myself can continue to work with the clerks and town and community councillors to try and promote these standards as we go through now coming cycles of elections, and when we have new members maybe coming on board in due course. I think it's important to be aware in the first instance what we have provided here from the County Borough Councillors' perspective is training for town and community councillors. I recently did a session a couple of weeks ago with some of our recent intakes of town and community councillors, and I'm actually doing another one now this evening with another group as well, and we are looking to see how we can roll this out more widely as we move forward. One of the best advantages we have now with online and virtual meetings is that we can record various meetings. So it's looking to see how we can get various different avenues of support out there, various different guidance for people to have access to the information as well, where hopefully we can try and make it personalised to the Neath Talbot County Borough Councillors and Town and Community Councillors as well. So Wendy and Catherine are obviously both here. They are perhaps the clerks to two of our biggest community and town councils in the area, being Neath and Clerks, both extremely well qualified and well experienced in issues of working with town councils. So I thought they would hopefully bring us a unique insight as well as to what some of the issues that they face, and obviously then how they go about working on code of conduct matters. So Wendy, Catherine, before we sort of start talking in the round, is there anything specifically you'd like to add before I hand back to the chair with any questions?
Generally, as I get to new councillors, I do an induction with every new councillor. They are all given a copy of the code of conduct, and we've adopted model code of conduct, so our code of conduct will be the same as Neath Talbot's code of conduct. We haven't made any changes to it whatsoever. They're given additional information, the councillor's guide from the Welsh Assembly. They're given an introduction to the council, what we do, what our services are, what our functions are, what my role is, what their role is. So that's done before they sign the declaration of interest with me. And they're made aware that once they've signed the declaration of acceptance of the code of conduct and the register of interest, that they are then formally a councillor, because until they've signed that, then obviously they're not formally a councillor, even though they've been elected or co-opted, and until they've actually signed the declaration to accept the code of conduct. So they're made aware of that from the very outstart before they even join any of the meetings. I suppose from my perspective, I try to give them information about my role, to make them aware that I'm responsible to full council as a corporate body, not to any individual members. So individual members can't instruct the town clerk to carry out any functions. It's a corporate decision as to what functions the clerk will actually carry out. Catherine and I have been talking a little earlier, and there's a little bit maybe of confusion regarding the dispensations, because we would class a dispensation when someone doesn't attend a meeting because they've got a medical issue, for example, and they request not to turn up for a few months. But also a dispensation would be to speak on a matter during a meeting. So Catherine has suggested maybe there could be a different terminology for the two, because it does make it slightly confusing between the dispensation for not coming to meetings for a particular reason, than a dispensation being allowed to speak. Now, we do fill out the forms at every meeting, but we were told back when Reece George was actually taking the forms back off us. And it must be about 7 or 8 years ago now, not to send them in anymore. So whilst we hold them here, you know, you wouldn't have been notified of if anyone had applied for dispensation or to speak on any particular issue. I mean, most of my members, you know, I advise my members if there's any uncertainty, leave the room. You know, if it can be perceived that there's conflict of interest, then my advice would be to leave. But obviously, I don't have the authority to enforce that. All I can do is make the recommendation that they do leave. But there was discussions about not receiving dispensations. But as I said, you know, we were told not to send those forms to the borough anymore. Catherine wants to add anything?
Not really. There's an induction pack which Wendy's covered, which is more or less the same in each town and community council, I guess. When the councillor does sign the code, it is to stick to those the 7 criteria within the code. That is set out at the beginning. I almost read it to them to say, do you understand? Especially with new members, there's a huge leap. If they've not been a member before, there's a huge leap into town and community council business, which they're expected to hit the ground running, and that's, you know, that's a difficult thing to do, especially with logistics of council meetings. So I always say, you know, in relation to dispensations, if in doubt, get out, and that's the way we sort of work it. You know, every town and community council is slightly different, even though we've got the same functions. Wendy and I are very different. Whilst the core business is exactly the same, the way we operate is slightly different to adapt to the area we're covering, and also the councillors. You know, to get 19 councillors together to make one decision, as you know, is quite tricky sometimes. So yeah, but going back to the code, it's basically the pivotal document which we start the induction off from.
If I could just sort of chip in then, Chair, just before we start that, just to elaborate on a couple of points there. I very much take on board the point about dispensation. Sometimes the terminology itself ultimately is lost in certain ways, and I was trying to emphasise in the recent training sessions that we undertook that the process people can go through if they have a specific matter, for example, which they would usually have a prejudicial interest on, which ultimately then they may wish to speak on in different ways in the process we go through there. So we can certainly look at ways to try and communicate that ultimately through whether it's some guidance notes, a little fact sheet ultimately that can be considered and then handed out then ultimately to members. I think one of the interesting questions I had is, if, for example, you had a conduct issue, for example, that ultimately cropped up, how do you normally approach it, and how do you look to try and work with the members in that regard then to try and address things?
If I couldn't sit down and have a discussion and get resolution from an issue, then it would have to be referred to the code of conduct, because whilst I'm the principal officer for the council, I don't have any enforcing authority, so I can't force the councillor to do anything. So my only route would be the ombudsman.
Yeah, and I think that's consistent across the board then, because it's a similar role ultimately for county borough council officers in that sense, and even in my role as the monitoring officer, the only thing we can do is ultimately advise members. The determination ultimately as to whether there is a potential violation of the code of conduct, whether they have that interest or whether there is a concern in that regard, will always vest in that particular member. All we can do is advise, we can give guidance, we can explain what the ombudsman's approach normally is, what legislation or case law and things like that could be out there as well. But the final decision itself is always one that will vest in members, and it's something that they're going to be able to determine ultimately themselves in that regard. I think that's an important point to make. So thank you for that, Chair. And as I said, thank you for that brief introduction. I'll hand back to the Chair now to take us through the next elements with any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Craig. Thank you, Mrs. Charles, and thank you, Mrs. Thomas. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us, or can I now move on to opening this out to a general discussion and questions and comments?
I know that last meeting there was knowledge that the clerks do our qualifications and training. We're members of a principal body, Society of Local Council Clerks, and once we completed the certificate qualification, which is specific to this sector, the Town and Community Council parish sector, we have to complete CBT, continuous professional development, to obtain the points to stay a member of the institute. So it isn't to do the qualification and then nothing further. We are required to continuously take training. Our training as clerks generally through the SLCC rather than One Voice Wales, who specialise in member training, because the training provided by One Voice Wales is too basic for our remit, basically, whereas the SLCC caters specifically for clerks. So the training is more specific to our role, rather than just a general overview of how the council runs, which tends to be the case with One Voice Wales. So I just wanted to let you know that we are fully trained, and we do have to continuously carry on with training, otherwise we lose our place in the institute.
I think just to add in there that there's a general push for all clerks to get the certificate qualification. The numbers are quite low in Wales who have that, but One Voice Wales are offering bursaries to the smaller town and community councils who don't have that support.
I actually obtained the certificate back in 2012. Within the first year it was introduced.
Yeah, it's gone silent. Does it mean that?
Yeah.
Councillor Freegard first, Chair, and then Louise Fleet.
Okay. Right. Thank you very much, Tammy. Councillor Freegard.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Thank you both for attending this morning. It's really nice to meet you and hear what you've got to say. I've just got 2 points, 2 questions. My first is, do you explain, is the role of the chair when conducting the meetings, the role of the chair and his or her responsibilities explained to the councillors? And given that there's a rise in terms of complaints of equality and respect, obviously it's down to the chair to be accountable for that code of conduct during all the meetings. So is there enough training for the chairs? Because there should be consistency amongst the chairs, that it's more formal, because that would make your jobs easier, because there would be fewer complaints, everybody would comply with the process and the rules. And so it's so important that the chairs are versed in what they should be doing and how they should be conducting the meetings. What's your views on that?
Yeah, they are given information as to what the councillor's role is and what the mayor, the chair of meetings role is as part of the induction. One Voice Wales provide a chairing module, and some of my councillors have taken that as they've been approaching the chair. Some chosen not to, unfortunately. I do feel it's worthwhile them taking that course, but I can't enforce that. We have within the new legislation now, I think it's November, we have to have a training policy, a schedule, which we've already drafted and has already been approved by council. We're looking to introduce now after the elections next year, because it was said that it would be a shame to pay out if members weren't re-elected. So we decided, although the schedule has been created, it will start as of May next year. But the discussions with my council was about what we could make mandatory and what should be recommended. There was an issue with some councillors felt that if everything was made mandatory, because there was quite a lot that we recommended initially as being mandatory, it could deter councillors from joining, because none of my members claim any allowance, because there is, through the remuneration panel, the £150 for all members. All mine have opted out of that, so they're all voluntary, and they feel that by forcing training on them, it might deter people wanting to join the council.
I was meaning mainly how the chairs run the meeting, so that if the meeting is run properly and correctly and everybody knows what they can and cannot say, you know, not stepping over the mark, and how they treat one another within the meeting, because obviously that's down to the control of the chair. Obviously, you wouldn't want a chair without any knowledge of that or training. And I was talking more about the running of the meeting.
Yeah, we have a policy that you can't go into the vice chair until you've had 3 years service and you have a lot of knowledge about the council runs, and then the 4th year would be the first time you're allowed to chair. And as I said, the training will come through One Voice Wales. So whilst I give basic information, I'm not a specialist in training for chairs roles.
Is that consistent throughout all the community councils, that they would have to have 3 years knowledge prior to any movement?
No.
Right. Okay.
But it is in our standing orders.
Okay, but not in everybody's?
No.
Right, okay, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Louise is next, I believe.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Wendy and Catherine. It's a really interesting summary you provided there. I've got a couple of questions. One is there any particular issue that you find commonly arises? So, for example, if community councillors come to you to seek your advice on something, before they take any action, do you find that there's any common issues that arise? Perhaps it might be knowledge, in which case that's a case of acquiring knowledge of certain things. But is there any sort of procedural issues that could, be fed back to CREI to provide more perhaps targeted training for them? So that was one question. And then the second question was about you yourselves. Because you were saying about your qualification and having CPD, so I was very interested in that. And I just wondered, from your perspective, do you have sufficient training, sufficient opportunities to acquire your CPD points within the community councils, or would you need assistance from maybe the council? I'm not putting the council forward, but there might be a way if you were finding that you didn't have sufficient opportunities to get your CPD points there to maintain your membership.
I tripled my CPD points, so I've got no problem with that. But I've talked enough now, so I'm going to pass over to Catherine.
Okay.
In relation to the training, it's all Clerk driven. So Wendy mentioned the CPD points, so we have to get a certain criteria each year. So that forces and focuses the clerk to get the training. What training they take up is really up to them, wherever they feel that the most interest is at that time.
Okay.
In relation to the councillors, I find that all the new ones, the new members who are coming in, need a lot of phone calls. You hear a lot sitting in a clerk's chair of so-and-so said this and so-and-so said that, and you've really got to get the facts, because sometimes Chinese whispers, and also the days of social media, it's just so difficult to lead them into dealing with, in particular in Neath, social media, calmly and productively, for them to have a debate and for them to have freedom of speech, but to do it without getting involved in, an online spat almost. That has proved difficult in the last couple of months, especially with COVID, because there's been an opportunity to actually go and see people. So the training, going back to councillor training, the chair's position is pivotal, and they have to have experience. And in Neath, when they become a vice chair, I harp on like a broken record that they do need to go on chair's training. It will benefit them as well as the meeting. So they know it's coming, because I'll always have a chat with them in relation to sort of going back and forth, because they sort of intertwine. If there is an issue that another member has mentioned or I have spotted, I'll phone them it's a key element of communication between the clerk and the councillor to have this open relationship, even if it's just a 5-minute phone call, to say, look, you know, good, this, that, and the other. Is everything okay? Do you need help with anything? Or do you need clarity? Each meeting, if we are talking about something that's in the community, which might be a little bit sensitive, it is please phone the clerk and get some clarity before you comment on it. It's always just that two-way conversation. You know, Wendy and I are always, the communication lines are always open between us and the councillors, but in Neath or Talbot, the clerks have also started a cluster group to support each other, which is really important. That wasn't happening before. I think Wendy and I kicked that off, which often ended with gin to calm the fraying nerves. But that support group really helped us because now we're sharing best practice, but more importantly, the things that don't work and they're having problems with, and we'll try, if there's an issue with the code of conduct, we'll try almost, you know, anonymously to try and help them with the process of dealing with that. And when it gets to a point where you think you need to pass this on, it's beyond the remit of the clerk. And that is again down to the clerk making that decision. So it's an extremely lonely job because you're taking a lot of responsibility on about the way, you know, your council is progressing really.
You don't feel very isolated as a clerk at times.
Thank you, that was really helpful.
I got 12 staff, but there's a lot of issues, obviously, because of confidentiality. I couldn't discuss with that staff. So I got no way of venting my frustrations. So, which is, you know, where that cluster group of clerks come in, although, you know, it's still anonymous. Everyone faces the same sort of issues.
Yes, yeah, and as you say, you can share your experiences, both good and the what doesn't work well, because lots of learning often arises from that, doesn't it? When things haven't gone right, you can analyse what did actually go wrong. Thank you. That was really interesting. Thank you.
Chair, Craig has his hand up.
I don't know whether we may have lost our chair. That I noticed the screen.
Yes,
yes.
In that sense. If I come in and I can just obviously elaborate then what I was saying. I think picking up apparently what Wendy and Catherine then were saying about the cluster group in that sense and the different ways ultimately that the communication is taking place. We've also sought where possible ultimately for me to have more engagement ultimately with them. So we created the sort of the Clerks Forum, I call it. We try to meet every sort of quarter or every 6 months in that sense, just for me to have an opportunity as well to meet the clerks and explain how the different work that's going on that I'm aware of, how often we can provide support ultimately as well. So from the standards committee through to myself in that sense, so we can try and offer that sort of advisory element. And it's an opportunity for me as well to touch base, obviously, to see what's going on in the town and community council world, so I can report obviously back to yourselves in that regard as to what's being told. So it is something, I think the flow of communication is one of the key principles here to drive forward, because it will all ultimately help and improve any conduct related matters or any other issues as well. So whether it's communication ultimately between the clerks, communication between clerks and councillors, communication between clerks and the local authority as well, the more I think we can communicate the different issues that are going on and the greater understanding in that regard, then ultimately the better and more advantageous things can ultimately be moving forward with the benefit ultimately from that. Yeah, has any joy timing in our chair?
No, his microphone is on. He's still connected to the meeting. Just he seems to have frozen. What if I remove him from the meeting and try and call it? It's hard to call back in with co-op here, but I will remove him from the meeting now and see if he can rejoin.
Great.
I'll send him the invite again now and we'll see how we get on. There we go. Excuse me.
Just give it a moment just in case.
Yes.
The device of technical meetings
Yes.
in the virtual world which we operate.
That's right. There we are. I've resent the invite now, Chair. So I know that Cliff said that he's on Sky, and we've been having a few issues, I think, countrywide, haven't we, with Sky last week. So maybe that's the problem at the moment. How do you wish to proceed, Craig?
In that sense, then, Tammy, I think I can work and try and take things forward and try and get everything moving in that regard. So I'll step in and I will try and coordinate with the different elements ultimately here. So that's absolutely fine for it. So as I said, that
Sorry, Craig. Sorry to interrupt you. Full flow there. Cliff has just been readmitted. Cliff, can you hear us? You're on mute. Cliff, you're still on mute, but you are in the meeting. We're guessing you've got problems with your Sky. Then you're off mute now, Cliff.
Right.
And you're in the meeting. Okay.
Anybody want to buy a desktop?
Not that one, thank you.
Great.
So you lost me for a bit. So we were on item 5 when I got lost.
That's it. Craig was just summing up, I believe, Craig. I was right, wasn't it?
Absolutely, Chair, indeed. So I was just explaining, obviously, the communication is obviously the key focus ultimately as we go forward. And all I think I would finally come back to as well is to Wendy and Catherine. Is there any additional support ultimately that could be provided? Obviously, you'd like the Standards Committee consider, and ultimately then I can work with you in that regard. So, not necessarily trying to give an answer now, but please always do speak up in the future. With whatever support ultimately I can provide, it will be a given in that sense. And I would always be glad to work with you all collectively to try and improve the standards regime in Neath Talbot as much as possible. So
my only thing I would raise is probably I would like a better relationship with some of the officers in the borough, because I feel there are services we could use which were raised through the charter. But whenever I go to someone, apart from you, Craig, which you're always very helpful,
thank you.
the response that I get is that we haven't got the capacity. So I don't feel that, not that we're not respected, I wouldn't say that.
It's difficult when Wendy and I go to national events and they ask how the relationship is between town and community councils and the unitary authority. It's very difficult to sit there and have these other clerks say, it's absolutely amazing, this is what we're doing together, this is what we're delivering together. And Neath Talbot is slightly different. We are building that relationship. I feel it's better, especially, I know you're sitting there, Craig, but it is much better at the moment with you and legal. And there are amazing pockets everywhere, but general overview, I think, that we get frustrated with is, there could be income generation here because we've got to pay somebody for the help. So why can't we pay our unitary authority? They've got a huge, suite of experience there. So why can't we get, dip into the pot and get the experience that they're used to the way we work? It's very similar. It's not the same, but it's very similar. So they understand the sort of logistics and the engine that is council business. It's just unfortunate that when we go out and have to buy that service in, we've got to explain how the town and community councils operate first, and then they can do the job. Whereas, it's almost a phone call away. We could be using that. And as Wendy said, we're all signed, well, most of us signed up to the charter. And it's difficult when we then know we can only go to legal or HR or, different departments depending on who is able to help. So that's a little bit of a frustration. And I sort of get, Wendy and I both get green-eyed monster because there's other town and community councils who get a lot more support across the board.
Like IT would be, an area. We pay a company for IT support. We could be paying the borough for IT support, but that's not an option given to us. And I feel there should be more collaboration. HR, I mean, we've got a good relationship with Craig, so legal's okay, but you know, their enforcement, we have issues with like dog fouling in the park. I've made inquiries about, you know, trying to get paying for an enforcement officer. Council's prepared to pay. You don't want anyone just to turn up. We're prepared to pay for an borough enforcement officer to come and do spot checks, and I haven't got anywhere with that. So, you know, there are various areas that we could be collaborating far better than we are. And it does get a bit frustrating when you look at the likes of Carmarthen, borough, the relationship that they have, you know, with the town and community councils, just is no comparison to the relationship we have in Neath Talbot.
If I could come back in then, Chair, just briefly, I think one of the things we do have, obviously, we have a County Borough Council and Town and Community Council liaison forum that does meet quite regularly. I think a lot of these issues, obviously, we can take, obviously, to that meeting, and there can be some discussions about our charter and whether it needs some refreshing or the different elements. So I think taking on board, obviously, the comments then that Catherine and Wendy have made there, absolutely understandable in that sense. I can make sure they feed back in now to that meeting as well, which looks at the entirety of the relationships between the various different organisations involved. So I'll make a note of that, and I'll make sure it gets addressed at those future meetings.
Okay, thank you, Craig. Just before I had my technical difficulties, I was going to ask when Louise was talking about CPD to make sure that everybody in the meeting knew what CPD meant. It's not a medical condition. I think I'm right in saying it's continual professional development.
Okay.
Yeah, so everybody's on board. Okay, thank you very much. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak on this?
No, I see no one else, Chair.
Thank you, Tammy. Well, can I say thank you very much to both the clerks from Neath and quite Frank for your contribution. It's been helpful. I've learned a lot. There's questions I was going to ask, but you've already answered them in the contribution you made. So can I say thanks very much for your time this morning. And you're most welcome to stay in the meeting while we continue with the rest of the agenda. But thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for having us. It's been useful to be able to put our perspective over to you. So yeah, thank you. Yeah. I think we leave now. Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye. Take care. Stay safe. Bye.
Okay, we can now move on to item number 6 on the agenda. That's the Standards Committee's annual report. And could I ask Craig if you would present this, please?
Of course, thank you very much, Chair. So just a very brief report. Legally from next year, we will be obliged that we will have to produce an annual report of every Standards Committee, which will be reported back to our full council. But members will recall last year, so that was in March 2020, just before the pandemic began, we looked at our annual report for 2019-2020. So this is an annual report as well now for 2020 to 2021. Obviously, at this point, we didn't have a huge number of meetings over the last year, but there were some matters which we did consider, and obviously we've put enough sort of forward work programme. So this is a report just to summarise those elements. The key element obviously that we can take from it is that during the course of the year we didn't actually have any referrals to the Standards Committee for any code of conduct issues ultimately to look at in respect of our members. And so this report is just for you for information purposes. Anything additional you may wish to add, I can obviously factor into the report. But once content, I'll make the steps now about commending this to the full council just so they can be noted officially. So thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Craig. Do any of our members have any comments or any remarks, any observations?
Can't see any, Chair. I take it back, Louise, Chair.
No, it's just an observation, Chair. Thank you, Craig, for the report. I thought it was very good and very informative, and well done for putting it together, because we haven't had, as you said, a lot to deal with during this past year, which is very positive in a way. So I thought this very succinctly and comprehensively set out our work, and it's a good report. So thank you very much.
Yes. Can I echo that as well? I'd like to endorse what Louise has just said. It is a good report. We've had a troublesome year, so has everybody else. It's the fact that The report doesn't contain too many problems. Is a testimony to the way that things have been handled. So thanks very much. Right, I'm now going to refer members to the recommendation on page 14 of the report. Can I ask for a proposal and a seconder? And if you do not indicate to the contrary by raising your electronic hand, it will be assumed that you are in favour of the recommendations.
Propose.
Thank you, Louise.
I'll second.
Thank you, Dennis. Okay, so proposed and seconded. And no indications of anybody wanting to speak, Tammy?
No, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, that allows us to move on to agenda item number 7, the summary of the cases. And again, can I ask Craig if he'll introduce the report, please?
Great, thank you very much, Chair. So as members will be aware, on a regular basis, we do produce a copy of the Ombudsman's Code of Conduct Casebook, which they produce on regular intervals, setting out the matters ultimately which they've considered during a fixed period. It's pretty much the usual types of complaints ultimately you see. I thought it was interesting picking up on Councillor Freeguard's comments earlier on with regards to quality and respect that was mentioned. A lot of the complaints ultimately that have come forward are in relation of promotion of equality and respect, and it's interesting to see now this 2-stage test that the Ombudsman is ultimately applying to make a determination as to how they wish to proceed with matters. So even if there is evidence, obviously, that there has been a breach, the public interest test which they're considering will give that final determination as to whether they feel this is something they wish to investigate or not. And in the majority of cases, as we'll see in the actual report itself, the Ombudsman has made the determination that they were not going to consider it. Only one matter ultimately within the Neath Talbot area, which is on page 39 of your reports, and that related to Neath Town Council, where there was an allegation of, again, failure for promotion of equality and respect. And it was an issue that took place outside of a council meeting, effectively, where there were some issues over the usage of the town hall. But the Ombudsman made the determination at that point that although it was felt there may have been a breach of the Code of Conduct, it wasn't in the public interest at that point to pursue it. They had some questions over some of the evidence on that particular case, but that's the only one specifically related to the Neath Talbot area. So happy to answer any questions members may have on that report, Chair, but it's just there for members' information and just to give an overview as to what the Ombudsman is considering at the moment.
Thank you, Craig. Anybody have any questions?
No, oh, sorry.
We,
It's just an observation that I do find it interesting to get the casebook, because it gives a really it gives insight into what's happening elsewhere, but also the kind of things that are coming up. So yeah, it is. I think we can. I think it really does help us, you know, in terms of the issues that are coming through, and it's just very interesting, as I say, to see what is actually coming through and how the Ombudsman has dealt with them as well. So yes.
I agree. Yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I read these reports, particularly when there are references to complaints made about health authorities, and it's like seeing yellow Renaults. Once you start looking at yellow Renaults, you keep seeing yellow Renaults. But I keep seeing Betsy Cadwallader health board coming up. Of course, Betsy Cadwallader is the biggest health board in Wales. It's now the biggest number of complaints. But it's interesting in that respect, in that you do get a flavour of what's happening throughout the country, not just in your own parish. Anyway, does anybody else have anything to say on number 7? I'm lost here, bits of paper. Yeah, if not, we're on agenda item number 8.
Yeah.
Okay, and agenda number 8 is the Code of Conduct Guidance by the Ombudsman. And again, can I ask Craig to speak on it, please?
Of course, thank you, Chair. So again, just for members' information purposes, the Ombudsman has released a very practical new guide for town and county borough councillors and town and community councillors as well. So the copy of this recent guidebook is intended just basically to emphasise some of the key principles in respect of the code of conduct, along with some practical examples. It's not meant to be the all singing or dancing document which will give every answer that a member would need, but it's about trying to establish some of the key principles that need to be taken into account here in that regard. A copy of this document has now been forwarded to all county borough councillors. More recently, I think it was just last week, I sent them the updated version as well. And I've also issued the town and community councils to all clerks and asked that they can issue as well accordingly to all of their elected members, just to make them aware of it. Not a huge amount of changes compared to previous versions, but some more practical examples. It tries to pick up some elements in respect of social media, which could potentially be of interest as well. But a very practical guide, I found, Chair. So I'm happy to answer any questions the members may have on that.
Right. Do members have any questions for Craig on agenda item number 8?
Councillor Freegard has her hand raised, Chair.
Right, Sharon.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I got a number of questions or comments on this one, Craig. And it goes back to the report saying how equality and respect is on the increase. Now, I know some of it's to do with social media, but a lot of it is to do with how people are treated and the conduct during meetings. And if you look back at what we've heard, and if you look at all the reports that we've had, when I think it was Catherine that mentioned the clerk, she mentioned how pivotal the chair's role is. There is no mention of the chair and how he conducts the meetings throughout anything that we've read today in casework, in the reports. Nothing is coming through about that pivotal role. That is key to conducting meetings. Now, we need to have specific training for those chairs. Now, we know that in some exemplary councils, like we've heard, they have 3 to 4 years mandatory. They have to have 3 or 4 years experience before they can become chair. But we know through reading our reports over the past couple of years, that's not the case with all community councils. People are going into the role and not understanding that it is their responsibility to control the meeting and their responsibility in setting the tone for how people react to one another. But yet the Ombudsman states this in the first page of the report, how this is on the increase, but has no solution or mentions no solution how to actually tackle it. Well, clearly the role of the chair is key, but it's not coming through anywhere. I think they also mentioned the clerks. They mentioned about it being a lonely role, and I think Louise brought up a couple of points, and at no point did they say, oh, well, that perhaps should have gone to the chair. The chair then would only go back to the clerk for procedural or the mechanics of the process of what they can do. And the chair, once again, that role is not fully understood by people in the committee. You know, and it shouldn't be a terribly lonely role if there is a good relationship between the chair and between the clerk and between the county. So on the other point, so that's my first point on that. I'm clearly really concerned about no mention of the chair's role in all this, because we could cut down perhaps 50% of the complaints that the Ombudsman has about bullying and, you know, the respect and the equality. So the other point, I think she was talking about a service level agreement, an SLA. Why haven't we, or why can't we offer an SLA to communities, community councils? It would be really beneficial to the council. I understand we got to forget the workload, because when you look then at perhaps extra income, we could think about extra staff, but we need to look at an SLA. If you want to buy into the SLA, they can. If they don't want to buy into the SLA, they don't. And obviously they wouldn't get the benefits that go with that. But she brought up a really good point. I mean, we've got the services. If they're buying into it, that is surely something that that we should consider. I wasn't quite clear on one of the points. I might have misheard. I thought she said, one of the clerks said that she had staff. Was that right?
Yes. Yeah,
So
that would.
she had 12 staff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that comes out of the payments they have, does it?
I presume so, yes, absolutely. So they will engage staff who could be, for example, caretakers, groundskeepers, assistant clerks, financial officers. There will be different setups in every
Right.
authority.
I wasn't clear as to whether those 12 staff were helping her in terms of admin or whether they were other people
It
throughout
could be
the
a wide
community.
remit of
Right.
function.
That's fine. That's fine on that. I'm going to have to switch back now into, I go in and out because I'm on my iPad, which is just running out, into the papers. But I get the page number now in a second, where they've changed our responsibilities for political leaders. I think that's on page, you just have that, page 61. And I just want some clarity on this, if I may, Craig, about our duty to political leaders coming in, because the way I've read it, because it goes on, there's 2 paragraphs, I think, on it, but the detail still isn't there. And it to me, it sounds like it could be a get-out clause for political leaders to come back to standards to say we hadn't given the support that we should have given. So that seems a bit bizarre to me. So have you got any clarity on that?
Of course I can. If I could pick up a couple of issues then just before we get into that element, just to address some of your comments, Councillor Freegard. The issue regarding chairs training, I absolutely understand that, and that could be one of the issues maybe we can look at in due course in respect of a training package for chairs, so a session on how you can control the meeting. So here, for example, in NPT, when we have a new chair who is ultimately reappointed, and as part of the member induction programme, there is a chair training session, whether we need to look at maybe some recording of that to try and get the message out then to the rest of the town councillors. That could be an avenue and we could certainly pursue going forward. So I'd gladly look into that to see how I can progress that for you. The issues surrounding the SLA, as you may have heard me mention as well, we have our forum in place between town and community councils and the local authority, which aims to address those sort of issues. We have a charter, which you may have heard mentioned, which says that certain services will be provided. So a lot of this element can be encapsulated around that charter. And I know there are some discussions ongoing about how, as we enter into our recovery phase, ultimately within the council following COVID, we can relook at that charter and see how it can be progressed in different ways. So I know there will be a programme of work that will be embarking on that then as well.
I'm just thinking that, Craig, going forward, if we did have a pandemic or any of the such again, how useful that could be, certain connections down to community council level, working with the council. You know, I'm thinking of Safe and Wealth and things like that, that it would be a little easier for us.
Of course, absolutely, and we can make sure that that's factored in. So picking up your points then with regarding political leaders, one of the things that will be changing next year, which came about as a result of the recent legislation from Welsh Government, is that there will be a duty on political leaders to ensure that members of their political groups are complying ultimately with the standards elements going forward. So what the law has basically said is that duty will mean that the political leaders will have to perhaps attend a standards committee at some point over the next sort of sessions, where ultimately they will explain how they approach the issue of standards in respect of their particular members. So I'll be offering some specific training sessions to group leaders after the local government elections next year to make them aware of what their respective obligations were. We'll be inviting group leaders to attend the standards committee for you to liaise with them and ask them directly how they are going to be promoting those elements. If you will recall, back last year when we were looking at the implementation of the Act, we did try to say about testing that process in advance of it becoming mandated by law and inviting the group leaders to attend. Unfortunately, with the pandemic and the number of meetings we had, the number then obviously couldn't be arranged at that point. But ultimately, going forward, it will become a regular occurrence for now political leaders to attend the meetings and to demonstrate to you as the Standards Committee what they are doing within their respective groups to help encourage the compliance with the code of conduct and those elements. And there'll be the specific training and how you wish to hold them to account and make then recommendations in that regard. It will be the role of the Standards Committee then to police, shall we say, that area and make sure that those steps are ultimately
That's what concerns me really, because on point 126, it places this additional function directly on this Standards Committee. Now, I got, you know, I hold my hand, I don't know what I should be monitoring. I don't know what support I should be asking, or really how I should challenge them in terms of scrutiny. So this additional function for us, I think it could have been given perhaps to a different department, but it's come to standards. Are we going to have the training to be able to know what we monitor, how we monitor, and what care we're supposed and support we're supposed to give?
Absolutely.
And
Indeed.
then what we do if they don't comply.
Indeed, absolutely. So just on that particular point, ultimately then, with regards to training, as part of the member induction programme next year, when these new provisions will take into effect, we'll be doing a training session for the Standards Committee on all of these new powers. And I was planning to bring a report anyway, probably the early part of next year in one of our next meetings, on just an update of what these changes ultimately will be, so you'll know where the level of work and the responsibility ultimately would lie. The question mark with regards to, for example, enforcing the duty is still a little bit loose at the moment, because we're still waiting some guidance from Welsh Government as to what those elements will be. But presumably it's going to be referral to the Ombudsman and those various different organisations if there are certain issues ultimately, because again, nothing is going to change. The authority and the organisation that will make sure and conduct any investigations to ensure compliance remains with the Ombudsman. It will be our role to ultimately make sure that conduct is at the forefront of any issues and making sure that has been promoted.
I just feel like there's a conflict of interest here, because what a political leader, for example, could have a complaint then about the Standards Committee, and we would be referred to the Ombudsman.
I don't think it's intended that that would be the ultimate case from the guidance in that sense. What the duty is going to be is to make sure that they are in complying with the code of conduct. If it was the case that it was felt the Standards Committee were not fulfilling the functions, it wouldn't necessarily be a complaint to the Ombudsman in that point, because it would be a legal obligation. So it would be challenged in a different forum, which I don't think is really feasible in that sense. So I don't think there's any need to worry about that type of element for it, if hopefully that can alleviate some concerns there.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Louise, I think you wanting to leave now?
Oh yeah, well I think we're almost to the end, yeah, aren't we? So you know, I can stay for a few more minutes. I just wanted to endorse and support what Sharon said about the role of the chairman. I think, Sharon, you made some excellent points there, and I think it is true that the chairman could preempt a lot of the issues that we see. So fully support what you're saying there. And I think going forward, it is going to be, I think, even more important, because not only have these kind of complaints increased, this kind of respect and equality, those kind of issues, as we've seen, but I just think they may well increase going forward in response to COVID. I mean, we see it in society generally, haven't we? The impact of COVID and people's behaviour. And I think that's going to manifest itself perhaps in a number of different ways, and quite possibly at community council level or even council level, simply because of the public, more challenging, more vexatious. And so I think it is going to be something that we perhaps, well, we just see what happens, won't we? But I wouldn't be surprised then if they do increase, and hence the need to try and nip it in the bud by having more rigorous and robust chairmanship training.
I think, just to finish this off because time is going on, I get sometimes concerned about town and community councils, town councils and community councils, in that very often I feel that the political differences at that level are far more volatile perhaps than they are at the next level up. And I also get concerned that the chairmen are often selected because it's their turn, it's a status symbol, and they don't bring the skills to, as Sharon has just said, they don't bring the skills that they should be bringing to them. But then I question myself, how do you interfere that without offending democracy? They've been elected to represent a political party, they're entitled to be volatile. And how do you interfere with the selection of a chairman? It's something that it really would challenge the Standards Committee. I think we'll have the guidance, but I can tell from the conversations we've had, it's something that really interests us all. But anyway, if I can leave it there now and say thanks very much for everybody, and thanks to Craig. And I think I'm going to move on to agenda item number 9, the grant of dispensation to Councillor Galsworthy. And again, I'll ask Craig if he'd introduce this to us, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Quite a straightforward report here. Members will recall that we previously granted dispensations to members who have family working for the County Borough Council, that they can vote and speak on any particular issues that affect staffing, provided that their member of the family is not directly financially advantaged or disadvantaged, and their employment is not as a senior manager or involved in the determination of any council policy. We've had a request from Councillor Galsworthy that her daughter has now recently started working in the Social Services Directorate, and accordingly we'd ask for the dispensation that we've granted to other members to be applied to Councillor Galsworthy as well. Chair.
Thank you very much, Craig. Any questions, comments? Okay, thanks. There's a recommendation on page 206 of the report in regard to this item. Can I ask for a proposer and a seconder, please? And if you do not,
I move, Chair.
right. Okay.
I second, Chair.
Thank you very much. So, okay, that takes us on to agenda item number 10, which is the grant of dispensation. That's right, grants of dispensation. Again, if I could ask Craig to speak on this one, please.
Of course, thank you, Chair. So this is an application that's been brought before members today from Councillor Nigel Hunt, who is seeking a dispensation to speak but not vote in respect of matters relating to the Talbot Town Centre. Councillor Hunt has a retail premises in Aberafan Shopping Centre, so when issues with regards to the Talbot Town Centre have been considered, he would have had to have declared a prejudicial interest and ultimately stepped out of the meeting. Councillor Hunt feels there could be an insight that could be brought into decision making in this regard, and the legislation does allow Standards Committee to grant a dispensation in these circumstances, but my advice on this occasion would be that any dispensation should be to speak but not vote on any such matters, because obviously there could be some personal impact that could be had. So I think it is within your remit to grant a dispensation to speak only on the scenario, and that's the recommendation that's brought before members today, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Craig. Did anybody have any remarks, any comments, any interest in this? No, okay. Okay, then, so I refer you to the recommendation on page 209 of the report, the one that Craig has just spoken about. Can I ask for a proposal and a seconder for this, please?
I propose, Chair.
Thank you very much, Karen. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you very much. And we move on to the final item on our agenda, item 11, urgent items. I haven't received any urgent items, so as far as I'm concerned, that ends the business for today. Thank you very much, all of you, for attending. Nice to see you.
All. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye.
Chair. Bye.
Keep an eye on Gumtree, there'll be a computer for sale.